Good afternoon, NDC London. How are we all feeling this afternoon? Good. It's the last session, or the second last session before the keynote. I hope you're all feeling good. I hope you've had lots of fantastic conversations. You've seen lots of great talks over the last 3 days. And I hope you're here ready to learn all about GitHub Copilot. Who in the room has used GitHub Copilot? Most people, that's good. Who hasn't used it but wants to try it? A couple of people. Who has no idea what I'm talking about? Okay, a couple of nods, that's all right. So it doesn't matter which boat you fell into then. Hopefully there's some things in this talk that are going to be good for you, which is going to be exciting. So we're going to talk all about GitHub Copilot, what it is, how to get the most out of it, and also some of the really cool bits and tricks that are coming soon, which I hope is going to be really good for you. Yes, I've got a new clicker and it works really awesome. I love it. So a little bit about me. My name is MishManners. Michelle, I'm from the GitHub Developer Advocate team. That is our amazing GitHub Octocat there with our cute little avocado. If you like that sticker, I have some of those. You can come and ask me for it. They're not at the front here. They're for like special people, so you can come talk to me. And this one down the bottom here is my Octocat, which you can actually make your own GitHub Octocat on the My Octocat generator. And there'll be a link to that at the end as well. So all the links and everything I talk about, there'll be a QR code at the end. So this is really cute. I made mine. You can make one yourself too. So you can follow both GitHub and myself on pretty much every social media platform known to man. So feel free to take photos, I was going to say tweet. Do we still call it a tweet? We still call it a tweet? Or a zeet? Or an eat? I don't know what they call it. I'm still calling it Twitter. So feel free to tag me on those social media platforms. GitHub does some fantastic videos on TikTok, Instagram, lots of tips and tricks as well. So follow GitHub. It's going to be fun. All right, what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover off a few different things. The first one is just setting the scene for artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of AI talk, so we're not going to go too deep into this today. We'll just make sure we're all on the same page. Just a couple on the applications of AI. Again, there's been lots of talks about this these couple of days, so we're not going to spend long on that. And then we're going to talk about what actually is GitHub Copilot. What is it that makes GitHub Copilot special? Look at a demo. How does it actually work? How can we get the most out of our GitHub Copilot experience? And then some of this, like, what is this whole idea of AI pair programming? This isn't send GitHub Copilot off to build the website and never hear from it again, right? This is about pair programming. What do we mean by that? And then a whole bit about this conversational AI. Let's have conversations with our AI to get the most out of it. So we'll talk about that too. So first of all, what is AI? I started an AI company back in 2016 when AI wasn't cool. No one really knew what it was. And people said, so what is it? Is it this, if I Google it, it kind of looks like this weird kind of artificial brain type thing? Is it like that Minority Report thing where it's all digital? What actually is it? And I really, really like this definition from IBM, which is what I kind of roll on, which is artificial intelligence leverages computers and machines to mimic the problem-solving and decision-making capabilities of the human mind. I think this stands true, right? So it doesn't really go into the technology and how it's actually built, but it says what it actually does and the thing that it does. So if you saw Kesha's talk this morning where she was talking about that ChatGPT and those conversationals, it kind of feels like a human, right? And she said, when we're talking to it, it feels like that human. That's that human capabilities coming into it, right? And this is where people get a bit worried about the job. AI might take our jobs thing. That's a whole nother talk, but people are worried about it because they're worried about this mimicking thing, right? If an AI can do what I do, but do better, where is my place in this? We won't talk too much about that. That's a whole other talk. We're going to go into GitHub Copilot stuff. So back when I started my AI company, again, people are like, still don't get what you're doing. I'm like, well, the great thing is this awesome movie came out called The Avengers, and I was like, it's Jarvis, right? AI is literally Jarvis. So, and I like to think of it as Jarvis, not Ultron. I think about the nice stuff. So if we think about Jarvis style, this is what AI is. And we do have the capabilities of Jarvis from Iron Man is currently available today. Might not be available commercially to every single person, but the company behind ChatGPT, OpenAI, has put ChatGPT 5, so GPT-5, the language model, into a physical humanoid robot. That has happened. So everything we saw in the Avengers is coming true. Yay. Next thing, you've probably all seen this awesome AI artwork. Who's tried some of the artwork platforms? A few people? We can generate artwork from some text inputs that we give now, right? This stuff is pretty amazing that AI can now create and do things, right? Anyone use Microsoft Designer? Yeah? So Microsoft Designer is Microsoft's new AI design system that's built on DALL-E 3. So these kind of things I'm giving you, and ChatGPT, which we saw this morning as well in the keynote. Now, these types of technologies, this is what's called generative AI. We are generating things from a prompt. The type of AI I was doing wasn't generative. It was machine recognition, image recognition. That isn't generative, right? That is training an AI to recognize something and it can do something from that. What we're doing now is actually using AI to create things. We are creating images. We're creating science fiction. If you saw, the ChatGPT talk this morning, we are creating hallucinations as well, right? AI can create things that sound really real to us as people, but at the end of the day, it's just making a lot of stuff up, right? A lot of it is true and real, but it is generating things. ChatGPT isn't always 100% factually correct, but it writes really nice prose. That's what it's been trained to do, right? Artwork, it's not always, we look at it sometimes and go, is there an extra hand in there, an extra finger? Everyone's seen those kind of ones, right? To an AI, that's correct and it's normal. It's just generating something that has been trained to do, right? And we now have this type of generative AI coming out of programming as well. Interestingly enough, GitHub Copilot came out before ChatGPT, so that's kind of interesting there. And GitHub Copilot isn't the only AI programming tool out there. There are plenty of others. I'm talking about GitHub Copilot, okay? So what is GitHub Copilot? GitHub Copilot is an AI pair programmer. We've used the OpenAI model to train GitHub Copilot on all the available code on the internet, all the public code on the internet. That's a lot of code. So when you're using GitHub Copilot, you are using the combined collective knowledge of all the world's developers. You literally have that knowledge at your fingertips. And what GitHub Copilot is doing, some people look at it and go, yeah, it's just predicting what I'm writing. I'm like, no, it is not predicting what you're going to write. Predictive text is, okay, let's look at what you've done previously. Let's look at what I kind of know from my training model to be the potential next word. That is not what GitHub Copilot is doing. It is synthesizing code that's specific to you, and it does that by different context. So let's actually look at that in a second. But again, this is what I call pair programming. A lot of people say to me, okay, well, GitHub Copilot can do all this cool stuff. Does that mean you can just get it to spit out a website for you? I was like, yeah, you should do that and see how that goes. Hey, GitHub Copilot, do a website and send it off and ship it. Has anyone had interns at their company? Anyone had to manage an intern? Would you ever have gotten an intern to do a project for you and ship that project without checking it? No. Do not do the same with code that comes from GitHub Copilot. As a developer, you are still responsible for the code you ship at the end of the day, whether you use an AI assistant or not, right? So we called it GitHub Copilot. Now, I know everyone's using the Copilot word now, but we're using it because it's a really good term to describe what these things are. GitHub Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, Windows, Microsoft. There'll probably be a Facebook Copilot next. Who knows, right? They're called Copilot. They didn't call it GitHub Pilot. That would be, go off and ship the code yourself, right? We are meant to work with these things to produce the code we want and the projects we want and ship the things we want. So how does it work? Let's have a look at a demo. So I've pre-recorded all this, and I'll tell you why I pre-record it in a minute. But I've pre-recorded all this. So my favorite editor is VS Code. So I've got VS Code up here. And you use it just like you would any other extension. So I install GitHub Copilot here, make sure it's actually working. You can see it pops up down the bottom, sign into GitHub, authenticate, and we're good to go with GitHub Copilot. So this is me using GitHub Copilot. This is one of the first times I used GitHub Copilot back when we first announced it back in 2021, November 2021. So probably this was sometime during 2022. I was working on a JavaScript programming little thing to learn how to do some more JavaScript. And this kind of question was posed to me, which was use JavaScript to take a sentence, reverse the sentence, make the first letter capital, put all the exclamation marks at the end and spit back that reverse sentence. So when I put it into GitHub Copilot, and again, I was like, oh, I haven't done JavaScript for a while. Good thing I got GitHub Copilot. I popped it in and it just gave me a one-line answer. And I was like, that's not what I want. So I defined at the top what I want to actually happen and what I want to come out at the end result. And GitHub Copilot helps me out here. This is the inline text functionality. So it's given me a function called reverse sentence. Sounds pretty legit. We want to reverse the sentence. And I'm adding in comments as I'm going. Now, being a non-developer by background, I always think of things in a very logical format. If someone handed me a piece of paper with a sentence on it, I'd be like, okay, how would I physically reverse this? Probably cutting it up first would be a good start. So I say, let's, or maybe making the letter first, lowercase. So I was like, okay, let's tell GitHub Copilot what I want to actually do. So I've said here, first, let's make the first letter of that current paragraph or that current sentence, let's make that lowercase. Because when we reverse the sentence, I want to make sure everything's lowercase, right? And I was given a sample set of sentences, so this isn't going to work in every circumstance. But I said, look, if it's not an I, let's do this. So this will, be a pretty good start for most things. And then I said, let's split up the sentence, right? This is me using my scissors to cut up the sentence with a piece of paper, right? And it's giving me, I'm basically not coding here. I mean, yes, I'm changing a few things, but GitHub Copilot is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me. I'm telling it what I want it to do. I love this too. I was like, I don't even know that half those things are punctuation marks, let alone having to find them all on the keyboard and type them in. GitHub Copilot does this for me. So it says, let's take out the punctuation marks. It goes, okay, well, we want to put those probably into an array because we want to keep those for later, so let's do that. And then I said, now let's remove them. Again, just put them into an array, keep them for later. And changing it up a little bit. Now, I know people are probably seeing in the audience, those of you who are JavaScript better than me, are probably going, there's a few bugs in here. Remember, it's GitHub Copilot. It's not perfect, right? If I gave this to a senior developer, they could probably do a better job than me, right? So this is just what GitHub Copilot is giving me back in the start of 2022, right, when we had one of our original models. But this part, let's reverse the sentence and then join it back in. Now, this is really interesting because I was like, let's turn GitHub Copilot off and see if I can actually do this. And I was like, okay, I can't quite do it. And then a senior developer who was watching my Twitch stream, because I did this live on Twitch, he gave me the final answer, what he thought it would be. And I was looking at his answer, and looking at GitHub Copilot, and looking at his answer, looking at GitHub Copilot, I'm like, they're the same thing, right? So what GitHub Copilot was giving me is very similar to what this senior developer came up on this last line here. So finally, and GitHub Copilot is even trying to predict, and did predict correctly, not predict, but synthesize correctly the type of comment that I wanted to write in, okay? And it's given me that sentence there. Now that was really cool. I was like, this is really, really awesome. So I did that live on a Twitch stream, and people were coming in going, this is really cool. You're coding so fast. At that point in time, people didn't really know what GitHub Copilot was. And I'm like, yeah, it's this like mythical science magic thing that's going on in the background. It's really, really cool. And they were like, yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Let's do that. Now, when we first launched GitHub Copilot, I wasn't the only one who had this reaction. There's a little company called Instagram, which you might have heard of, that one of their co-founders said, this is mind-blowing. Remember, this was launched before ChatGPT was available to everyone. So he's saying this is really, really mind-blowing technology. Another one from a senior developer from quite a well-known group said, this works shockingly well, and I'm never going to develop without it again. Right? Those people who put your hands up who've been using GitHub Copilot for like quite some time. A few people? Yeah, because you think about not using it anymore. Like, right, yeah, exactly, right? You just shake your head going, no, don't let me go back to the before times, right? Pardon? Yes, we're going to get to that as well. So it works amazingly well. Now, two reasons why I pre-record on my demos. One, I never trust the internet anywhere I go and travel. I'm from Australia, so I've got big distrust issues with the internet. The second reason why I don't do these live is, another one, you always get different answers from GitHub Copilot. It's always interesting to see what it comes up with. But the more important reason why I don't do these things live is because GitHub Copilot learns. So when we did this live on Twitch, someone jumped in later and was like, whoa, what have you been doing? This looks really cool. I'm like, let's show you what we've been doing. And it's just giving me the whole thing. Well, 20-something lines of code. Now, for those of you who can't quite see at the background, it's grayed out. So grayed out is the suggestion that GitHub Copilot gives you, and then if you tab, you can accept it. So my whole spiel of telling this person what we'd just done live on Twitch just fell into a heap because GitHub Copilot remembered exactly what I was going to write, literally letter for letter. So that's another reason why I don't do it. Now, GitHub Copilot Chat. Who's used GitHub Copilot Chat? Few people. This is what everyone's really excited about now. This has taken programming and GitHub Copilot to the next level. So what I was showing you before is called inline text suggestions. That's why you're coding. GitHub Copilot is giving you suggestions for what might be inserted into where your cursor currently is. The GitHub Copilot chat experience is a little bit like ChatGPT in the sense that it's very conversational based, right? So we've done some really amazing things with GitHub Copilot chat. So this is me trying it out for one of the first times. I just had this some simple JavaScript on screen, and all I'm doing, I've got GitHub Copilot chat over on the side here, and all I'm asking is, can you please explain the code that's on screen? And it explains it. And I keep saying, have a conversation with it. How do I make this better? And it's like, well, maybe you could try these 5 things. I'm like, that's cool. And then it's even giving me suggestions. What are some common design patterns used in elevator systems? Interesting. So GitHub Copilot, I'm able to now have a conversation with it about the code that it has on screen. Now, who was in Kesha's ChatGPT talk? A few people. So she put up some of the ideas about using ChatGPT for coding, which you can do, right? But GitHub Copilot has so much more context around the code that you're using that's able to give you a bit more specific answers to your questions. And I'll show you a bit more in the context of what I mean in a moment, but also it's built into your editor, right? A lot of people, when they're using ChatGPT, you have to switch between things all the time, right? As developers, we like to work in the same instance of the thing we're working in. If we like the terminal, we work in the terminal. If we like an IDE, we work in that. We don't like to switch between them. GitHub Copilot has also been optimized specifically for code and trained specifically on code. Some people say to me, well, but ChatGPT knows code too. It's like, yeah, because there's code on the internet. ChatGPT has been trained on everything on the internet, right? GitHub Copilot has been specifically optimized for that. Another one here. So this is me, completely blank, no context at all. I can ask GitHub Copilot to help make me something. So in this instance, I said, can you make me a Space Invaders game? And it goes, sure, I can make you a Space Invaders game. And what I like about this is it doesn't go, blah, here's some code. It says, sure, I can help. Do you have any preferences? Do you have requirements? What language would you like to program this in? I'm like, whoa, didn't actually think about those things. And I'm able to have this conversation with GitHub Copilot as I'm going to actually get what I want. Now, imagine if you said to me, hey, Mish, you're all right at building websites. Can you build me a website? I say, yep, sure. Give me a minute. I'm just going to go build this website. I'm going to be like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's going to be like, this is great. It's going to have these colors and here's your website. And you're like, but I didn't tell you what I need and what I want, right? Some people say, why isn't it spitting out something straight away? We need to give it some things, right? So we would probably follow up that conversation, be like, sure, I can build a website. What requirements do you have? What kind of website does it want to be? Do we want to make an e-commerce website? Do you want a portfolio website? Do you want it to be static? Do you want it to be dynamic? How often do you want to update it, right? As people, we have these conversations all the time. You booked a holiday recently? Hey, travel agent, I'd like to book a holiday. Yeah, let me go book that holiday for you. It's like, hang on. Right? We have these types of conversations all the time. So our AI pair programmers have those same conversations. Instead of going out and just spitting out the code straight away, it gives us more questions to find out what requirements we have for our project, for the thing we want to work on, right? And I really like this about it. And it doesn't just spit out code all the time in the sense that even when it does give you code, it actually explains what the code is. So when you see here, like, how do I create the game window? So I'm just asking a whole bunch of questions and I can say, cool, here it is right here. It doesn't just give me the code straight away. It tells me what the code is doing. This code initializes the game window. This code does this. This code does that, right? So we're able to learn more while using GitHub Copilot as well. It doesn't just give us the stuff all the time. This is another one. How do I toggle light and dark mode on my website? This was I'm going to come back to this example in a minute, but what I liked about this is it didn't always give me just HTML, right, all the time. When I had issues with this, I said, how do I fix this? And it's able to go, okay, we've created this, have you checked this, have you done this? We're able to ask very specific questions about the thing we're asking about. How do I improve it? Here are some suggestions. Now, we had someone ask before about unit testing. Who likes writing unit tests? Anyone in the room? A couple of people. Okay, you can ignore this slide, right? This one, yeah, here we go. There we go. It's up there on the screen now. Perfect. Yeah, so we can get GitHub Copilot to write tests for the thing that we've got on screen, right? And a lot of developers say to me, well, one thing I like about development is I get to create things all the time. What I don't like is when I have to stop my creation process to go fix the thing. You're laughing at that. So a lot of people, they're like, oh, this is really great with GitHub Copilot. I now get the opportunity to create more cool stuff because GitHub Copilot can help me fix the broken things and the cool stuff so I can go keep making all the cool stuff, which I think is really awesome. And it even explains it again. This use case, this test case creates a new directory that already exists and tests it by doing this. Again, we're learning why we're using GitHub Copilot. Next one, translating code from one language to another. Who is old enough to remember COBOL or used it at all? Few people. For me, I'm like, isn't that obsolete? And in this case, everyone was like, yeah, let's actually translate it into something slightly more useful. So we can use, we got it to explain it and then, hey, can you translate this to Java for me? And it goes, cool, I can translate it to this. We need to create the server socket. We need to accept the client condition. And here is a simplified version how we might do that, right? This is making it so much easier now to translate from one language to another. Now, a lot of the things I've talked about is getting the right answers from GitHub Copilot. And that is all to do with the questions you ask. Is anyone a journalist in the room or dealt with journalists at all? Yeah, a couple of people. You know how they always get the right answer out of or the thing they want, right? They're doing prompt engineering on the people they're interviewing, right? They ask very specific questions to entice a specific answer out of the person. We need to do the same when we're working with AI. So if we're using ChatGPT or using GitHub Copilot, the question we ask makes a difference to the answer we get back. So to define prompt engineering, I found this really nice definition. This is actually from one of the GitHub team members. And it's the process of giving that very clear natural language, so human language, instruction to a computer program. And this is the part they're talking about that's actually really important in the prompt engineering process. Giving clear. We need to be clear and specific when we give prompts to the computer. If we're not getting the right information back or the information we want, then it's probably because we didn't ask the right questions, okay? So here are some tips, I guess, for doing good prompt crafting. And that is using some conventions, right? So when we're asking and we're naming things, we're using variables, let's be specific. Let's actually be generic across the board when we use these. So variable names, instead of saying like total equals, well, what does that mean? Like ask it to give you total attendees. That means GitHub Copilot goes, well, whatever this thing I'm creating is probably going to be something to do with the total number of people in the room, right? So GitHub Copilot already has some of that context. When we're creating method signatures, use syntax, right? If we're able to do this and do it across the board, it makes it much more easier for GitHub Copilot to understand. And naming conventions. Let's use our camel case to name things correctly, right? So if I said to this, it's like, oh yeah, FizzBuzz. Great, we're going to use that, and that's going to be what we do, right? Who has tried to use some of the AI-generated art and not got what they wanted? Yep. That's probably because of the prompt that we give it, right? So I think I wrote down the prompt that I gave this. Yeah, so for this one, it didn't do a too bad job, but I said science fiction, fantasy, futuristic city with neon close-up of a Robotron-style bike somewhere in the image. right? Gave me a pretty good output because I was a little bit specific about what I wanted. I didn't say anything about the colours. If I didn't want those colours, I should have said that. I didn't say I wanted people in the picture. If I wanted people in the picture, I should have said that, right? So what we ask of the AI, especially with things like the the image generation and ChatGPT, it has no other context other than the question you're asking. And that's why I love GitHub Copilot. I'm going to come back to this context in a minute of GitHub Copilot, is it has no other context. Only the question you ask is the only thing it has. So GitHub Copilot has a little bit more, but we still need to be very specific and intentional when we ask a question of GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot is able to take into account a bunch of context. So here we have a blank file. It has zero context right now. It's got nothing. There's no names, no nothing. So if I name it sentiment.py, it now has 2 pieces of context. It knows that this is called sentiment, so it's possibly something about sentiment analysis. That sounds about right. And .py, which means now we know which language we want this written in. We want this written in Python. So GitHub Copilot has that. And so it can start saying, okay, looks like this is sentiment. This is great. We're going to start adding, and it starts giving me suggestions for what we could potentially do with this with no other context. This is without the chat interface, right? This is the only context it has, right? So we can do it like this as well. And so here I'm saying, okay, let's use a web service to, okay, yep, did that pretty good. Web service to determine text is positive or negative, and even picks up a URL for what I could potentially use. Now, again, I'm writing a few things. So that's the thing with GitHub Copilot is some people say, but it gives me the wrong thing sometimes, or it just says something I don't want to do. And I'm like, you don't have to accept it, right? If a colleague comes to you and says, hey, here's some cool code I written, you go, that's really bad. You don't necessarily have to accept that code, right? You could say, it's okay. Your code's all right. Let's change it. Let's refine it. We can do the same with GitHub Copilot. So in this case, I'm giving some examples. Okay, I love this movie. It was the first one I gave. Now GitHub Copilot's actually trying to, give it, and they kept saying, I'm so happy and excited, I'm so happy and excited and more excited. And I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to give you some different answers, right? I feel great. And then it goes, oh, I like this tone of voice you're going along. Let's go, I feel amazing. I feel wonderful. I feel awesome. I'm like, okay, just make it a little bit different again. And I'm like, okay, I did this one for NDC Oslo. NDC Oslo, and it picked it up. It's the best conference in the world. I was like, oh, that's nice. So we can leave that as some context for positive examples. Now, GitHub Copilot takes the opposite of those and even says NDC Oslo is the worst conference ever. I was like, well, that's not very nice. I deleted that line because I was like, I just feel bad that it's actually suggested that for me. But then I was like, okay, what happens if I add in more? So I deleted that. I felt bad for the organisers. So if I add in here, is the best conference ever. I'm so happy. Great. So what if I say, again, I was in Norway at the time. So if I say Norway is a beautiful country, it goes, great, that's the positive bit of analysis you've got there. Now let's give it the opposite of that. Now it's going to put that line back in and then say it's a horrible country. So I was like, sorry, Norway. I feel bad about that. So I deleted that again. Again, you can leave them in there for the model, but now we need to actually create the actual the function. So here's for example and positive examples, and it's just giving me this stuff based on the context, right? So this is a really good context that we can use. Next example I've got is this is all the context. So I mentioned to you that ChatGPT and some of those image generations, the only bit of context they have is, the model they've been trained on, and then the prompt that you give it, right? That's the only bit of context they have. What I love about GitHub Copilot, it has so much more context. So GitHub Copilot, this is VS Code. Again, as I said, this is my favorite, so I like to use it. There's a whole bunch of context on this screen here that GitHub Copilot can take into account. So for example, this is a project I've got open. I called this one Hot Rod. We use this for one in Tekorama. And so the first bit of context it takes is what is the file on screen. So right here I have a Blazor folder, and we've got this is the build page. So this is the home page that's running here. So it's taking this whole file into context. Now it's written in Blazor, so .razor, and it's got 2 other files open in my VS Code tab. GitHub Copilot can see those files. It understands what is in those and can take that into context as well. So I've got the site CSS folder and the index up there as well, right? So I can take both of those into context. The next thing I can take is the whole project structure, right? So unless it's open in a tab, GitHub Copilot can't read the contents of that file, but it can read the names of the files, how it's structured, where it's located. So if you've ever been using GitHub Copilot and it just goes there's the reference to your CSS file and you go, how did it know that, right? It's because it can take the context of your whole folder structure there. So this is what's really cool about GitHub Copilot is it can do these things, right? And it can understand the natural language that you write into the code. So if you've got comments in there, it can understand that. If you're writing a README file about your project, it can see the whole project there. So it can actually write something that is very meaningful. It doesn't just give you something generic that you then have to go and change, right? The next thing we can do to give it more context is if we're using GitHub Copilot Chat, we can actually use commands. And these are relatively new. And I've got a link to all the commands that we can use here. But one of them is we can use the /explain. So instead of asking ChatGPT GitHub Copilot like I did before, hey, can you please explain this code? We've now implemented that into a command. So you can literally just pull up a file and go /explain and GitHub Copilot will explain that file to you. You could make it more specific then by saying, explain how this specific thing in the folder works or this specific thing in the file works. How does the for loop work specifically, right? As we can get more specific about that if we give it the original context that we actually want you to explain something to me. We can use doc. Write me a document. Write me the README file. Explain the docs set. I need something to do with the docs, right? Is we can use that as a command. The next one you saw there, write me a test. So instead of saying, hey, GitHub Copilot, can you please write me a test to fix this? We can literally just go into a file now and write /tests, and it will write a test for that file or for that piece of code that you've got there, which I think is really cool. It saves a lot of time. I'm not very good at writing tests either. /fix, I love this one. Fix the thing for me, right? How often has everyone recently got like a Sparky? Is that a word out here? Sparky is an electrician. Yeah, cool, it's a word. And you just bring it, I just need this fixed. And they're like, what's wrong? I don't know, just fix it, right? GitHub Copilot can do that. So you bring up a file, /fix, and it'll go, yeah, here's some suggestions on how to fix this file, right? We might want to be specific. We might want to say, hey, I want to fix the formatting. I want to fix the comments. I want to fix something. We can be a little bit more specific as well, but if we just write /fix, it'll just give us a fix for the whole file. Again, another nice one, just help me. Help me bake a cake. It's not going to do that. But, help me with the file. So /help means GitHub Copilot knows it's going to try and help you with something. We can ask things that aren't necessarily to do exactly with the code that's on screen too. We might say, /help me figure out how to put this onto the internet. Find me a nice URL for how to build a cake or bake a cake. Build. Gee, I'm really into the development words here at the moment, aren't I? So I've got a whole list of these as well on how to use them and the whole list of the ones that are available. And new as well. So remember when I typed in before, can you please help me create a new Space Invaders game? I could just write /new Space Invaders game. And it knows it is going to create a new project that is going to be about the Space Invaders game. If I've already got the whole project folder open, I could go /new markdown README file, right? And it knows to create a new file in a markdown format. So what can I code in? GitHub Copilot, as I mentioned, one of the great things about it over something like ChatGPT for coding is that it's built into the editor you know and love. So we have a few of them available, and we have some great languages available as well. So I've given you a couple of examples. There was a Blazor one, there was a Python one, there was a JavaScript one. So you can use Python, Java, JavaScript, Go, Ruby, TypeScript, right? These are the languages that GitHub Copilot is really proficient in. Now you might be sitting there going, they seem like the most popular languages on the internet. you would be right. So GitHub Copilot, again, as I said, has been trained on all the code available on the internet. So the more popular languages have more data points to put into GitHub Copilot, which means it's going to be better at these things because it has more data to train the model on. So it knows more about Python and Java and JavaScript than some of the more obscure languages. But all languages are on the internet. If it's on the internet, GitHub Copilot's been trained in, so it would know it, right? It might not know it as well as, say, Python and JavaScript, but it would know how to do that language. The IDEs it's available in, as I said, available in your favorite code editors. So VS Code, one of my favorites, Visual Studio, JetBrains IDEs, and NeoVim. Now, GitHub Copilot is available in all of these. GitHub Copilot Chat, however, is available in these too, currently. We've announced that it's coming for JetBrains IDEs, so GitHub Copilot Chat is on its way. You can sign up to the wait list. I've got a link as well, so you don't have to find it. And NeoVim will get announced at some point. Now you might be sitting there again, and you've seen all these AI talks over the last couple of days going, I feel really insecure about my job right now, and all these robots are really smart, and I might not be as smart as some of these robots and other people in the room, right? This was a question that everyone had when GitHub Copilot was first launched. Are the robots going to take away our jobs? Now, at GitHub, we don't just say, don't worry about it, it's all fine. It'll be good. We actually went and did a research study on it. So we recruited developers. We recruited 95 professional developers and split them randomly into 2 groups. Now note there, these are professional developers. They've been trained as developers. They're currently working as developers. Well, were at the time. I don't know what they're doing now. And I didn't specify what language they specifically code or write in. They're just professional developers who work in development jobs, and we split them randomly into 2 groups. So we gave them a task. They had to write a web server using JavaScript, right? So of those 2 groups, we gave one group GitHub Copilot. Yeah, you can go use GitHub Copilot. It's really interesting, actually, when you get a lot of people and they put their hand up to do a research study and then they find out they're in the control group and they're like, oh, but I'm really sad. I want to use this thing. So unfortunately, 50 of them were the control and they had to not use GitHub Copilot. So I don't know whether they went 45 and 50. Don't ask me why. I wasn't part of that. But of the people who used GitHub Copilot, 78% of them completed the task of writing this web server using JavaScript. On the flip side, only 70. Now I looked at that and went, 8% difference. Is it that big of a problem? Probably not. Maybe it's a little bit, but it's not really that big a deal, is it? But when we look at the time it took them to actually complete these tasks, or this task, the group that used GitHub Copilot, and remember, this is when we first launched GitHub Copilot in 2021. So it was our original large language model. It didn't have the chat functionalities or any of those kind of cool new shiny things we've got. It took them 1 hour and 11 minutes to write the web server in JavaScript, of the people who actually completed it. On the flip side, the ones who did complete it, 2 hours and 41 minutes. That's 1 hour and a half difference. Now, I don't know about all you in the room, but I can think of a lot more things, a lot better things I could do with 1 hour and a half extra of my day. So that for me was the real kicker. And that for everyone at the time was like, this is what is going to be the game changer, is that it doesn't just help us get to completion, it actually gets us there faster and more efficient. But again, being GitHub, at the same time, we're like, that's cool that they did it faster, but did they enjoy themselves? Or were they sitting there going, tab, accept, tab, accept, tab? No, seriously, you could have just like given one of those clicky bird things out of The Simpsons to do that job, right? No, what they found was that the developers who were using GitHub Copilot actually loved using GitHub Copilot because they said they had to think less. And I'm like, is that a good thing? But you read the next one. When I did have to think, it was the fun stuff that sets off that little spark that makes coding enjoyable again. We're like, well, that's cool. So these are the things that people really enjoyed. It took them less time to do it, but it was much more exciting. right? GitHub Copilot was doing all the boring, repetitive coding type stuff that we have to do every day, right? If I'm creating a website, doing the doc HTML head, tags, head, body, like that doesn't make me a good developer. It just takes time to write out. I'm probably copying and pasting it for someone else anyway, right? But having GitHub Copilot to do that boring stuff, right, means I can spend more time on figuring out the more fun, exciting things, which I think is great. And another one said that trying to code in an unfamiliar language is like Googling everything when you're in a foreign country and trying to navigate, but having GitHub Copilot is like having an interpreter. Now, this is the guy from OpenAI, right? They're the ones who built the large language model. And I think this is really awesome. Now, has anyone traveled recently to a foreign country that don't speak the language? A few people? Yeah, like you have Google Translate and you have even the Google Translate lens, but having someone who speaks your language and the native language just makes such a difference, right? There's all these social cues and anecdotes and things that we don't necessarily pick up as people, right? So Google's really good at translating the simple stuff. Having someone there is much better, and that's what they said about GitHub Copilot. Now, I was a bit like these developers when I tried out GitHub Copilot for the first time, and I just had such a great time. And I used it really recently. So in December last year, me and my now husband got married, and thank you. And like all good developers, when you get married, you turn straight to GitHub Copilot, right? So we were getting married and we only got engaged in August last year, so I had 4 months to plan a wedding, and I was like, I'm going to get out GitHub Copilot. So I went to my trusty GitHub Copilot, and I had GitHub Copilot chat at the time, and I said, hey, GitHub Copilot, what do I need to do to plan my wedding and like get RSVPs and stuff? And GitHub Copilot goes, sorry, can't help you. I can only help out with programming and code-related questions. I was like, okay, GitHub Copilot. But hey, GitHub Copilot, I need to do my wedding RSVPs for the website that I'm building. What do I need to do? Oh, yes, for wedding RSVPs, you need to think of these things. You want the name of the guest, the email, the numbers attending, which will be attending for the ceremony. Like even says wedding ceremony, reception, dietary requirements, restrictions. I'm like, so GitHub Copilot is a wedding planner, right? So in the original context, it goes, no, I only help with coding-related questions. As soon as I said, oh, but I'm actually building a website for my wedding, which we did build, GitHub Copilot goes, oh, I've got ya. We can do all this. So they even gave me lots of great information. So this one here ended up being incorrect, which I confirmed from, so I'll give you the story. So I said, it gave me like a form, because I was building a form for my RSVPs, and it gave me like, the numbers you add in for the attendees. And I was like, okay, if I don't put a number for the minimum maximum, what does it take as the default minimum and maximum values? So GitHub Copilot, yes, you can allow for a 0 value by adding the min and max input. And it says if you set its value to 0, here's an example. So if you don't set anything, it will be 0. And I tweeted this out being like, GitHub Copilot, it's so helpful, yay. And then someone came back to me and went, that's actually wrong. I was like, what? GitHub Copilot is wrong? And he was like, yeah. So if you don't set a minimum maximum, it takes any number as its minimum maximum. So negative infinity to positive infinity. I was like, okay, I learned something. So GitHub Copilot isn't always 100% correct. This is where the human developer needs to come in, right? And we need to constantly look at our code, assess our code and goes, is the code we're shipping actually correct? So GitHub Copilot doesn't know everything. Now, this example I gave you before, which is toggling light and dark mode. So this was literally for my wedding. Like all good developers, I had to have dark mode on my wedding website, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. And eventually we figured it out, but GitHub Copilot was able to give me some ideas, try having a look in the CSS files. So it turned out we ended up putting a light and a dark mode CSS file and combining them to one, because that's actually way more smart than actually putting in 2 files originally. So it originally told me, hey, you should do 2 files. And I was like, why are you doing 2 files? You need 1. And I was like, but you said to do the 2 files. So again, we need to constantly iterate and ask GitHub Copilot what we're doing. It even gives me things like this. How can I optimize images of my website? Notice 0 code here. It's just giving me information on how to optimize stuff. It can even give me information like one of the pages wasn't loading and it said, hey, you should try this, open up the console, check the terminal, do this. And I was like, this is so helpful pair programmer. So we ended up having our wedding website, white and dark mode. It was all great. But the great thing about GitHub Copilot is it suggested things. It said it wasn't a wedding planner, but it suggested things. Hey, do you want a lightbox mode? And I can give you the code for that. Would you like a countdown timer? Because I noticed this is a wedding. You should probably have a countdown timer. I was like, yeah, I should. Sweet. So GitHub Copilot's able to do all these things. And all these developers, not just myself, but around the world, are absolutely loving GitHub Copilot. So that number is now wrong. There's now 1.5 million developers or over 1.5 million developers using and loving GitHub Copilot. 75% of them are feeling more fulfilled in the jobs they do. They are enjoying their coding much more. They are able to let GitHub Copilot do all the boring, repetitive code and spend more time building websites for their wedding. No, I'm just kidding. But they're able to spend more time actually doing the problem-solving stuff and really digging in deep. Somebody said to me recently, like, all this AI revolution stuff, do you reckon people are just going to lose their jobs and all that kind of stuff? I'm like, no, I reckon it's going to be like writing. They're like, what do you mean like writing? I was like, well, back in the day when writing was first invented, the whole of society thought we were going to become dumb because we now no longer needed to remember stuff. We were able to write it down. So like, think about that back in the day, like, right? If you needed to remember or you wanted to know a piece of information, you had to remember it. It wasn't written down anywhere. But what actually happened, instead of people becoming dumb, because we didn't have to think about these things anymore, our brains were freed up. And there was this massive wave of innovation and invention because we're able to think and have our minds freely just go nuts and just like plan and build and make cool new things. I think that's what's going to happen with this age of AI and GitHub Copilot. So our brain's going to be freed up from this like more boring and mundane and repetitive stuff, and we're going to see I hope, we're going to see lots of really, really cool things come out. 55% faster coding. So that's from that research study, that 1 hour and a half. I reckon that's gone faster now because that research study was from back when we hadn't launched GitHub Copilot chat. I reckon that number's a lot faster now. This is a mind-blowing number. And again, this is from a year ago, maybe 6 months ago now. 46% of the code being committed to the internet now is written by an AI. GitHub Copilot or other. Right? That is a mind-boggling realization when you're thinking about half of the code going to internet right now isn't written by a human, it's written by an AI. So what does that look like? What does that landscape look like? Are we part of this? And I think this number's gone up again. So this number was from November last year. It's now gone up. So 37,500 businesses now are building with GitHub Copilot. So when we first launched it, all the companies, well, not all, but there was quite a lot of companies that were like, oh, we don't want that, get AI out the door. Now they're all like, excuse me, when can we get this AI thing that everyone's talking about? So we have lots of businesses using GitHub Copilot for business now, which is really cool. So generative AI, right? This is just a more general example of all this type of stuff coming together. So this was a university bunch of professionals. They got together and they gave them a task of writing a paper, and 37% increase in productivity for the ones that used AI-generated tools, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, things like that. And what they also discovered is not only was that boost in productivity, which means it was faster, it was actually higher quality. It went from being like an average of like a C- to a B+. Right? So by using these, we could actually do some amazing things with AI. And Goldman Sachs has predicted that AI is going to raise the global gross domestic product by 7%, which is actually, again, mind-blowing. Right? Now, but what if you're sitting there and you're like, but I'm actually writing some code that's really, really like groundbreaking, and I don't want GitHub Copilot to even potentially suggest to me any code that is out there on the internet right now. So for those of you sitting there, the way GitHub Copilot works is kind of like ChatGPT, any responses in or out that you give GitHub Copilot or that it gives you, we're able to use that to retrain the model. That's if you're using GitHub Copilot as an individual. If you're using GitHub Copilot as part of your business and you have the GitHub Copilot for Business edition, that doesn't happen. So if you're building things for your work and you want to ensure that your code might not potentially get suggested to someone else via a training model, use GitHub Copilot for Business. But even if you're using for personal, you can actually ensure that your code isn't being trained back into the model, but also that you might not potentially get suggested code that might be available elsewhere. Now, because GitHub Copilot has been trained on all the public code available on the internet, sometimes you can get, in very rare cases, I think it's like less than 1% of the suggestions that GitHub Copilot gives you, you might get something that would be similar to other code. And when we say similar, it's like more than 150 characters, right? So you can actually change this setting. So on GitHub on the web, we have a GitHub Copilot settings feature. So you go down to your settings, down on the side over here, you've got GitHub Copilot. So if you click the GitHub Copilot one on the side there, you've got a couple of things here. First one is suggested matches public code. So if you don't want GitHub Copilot to suggest to you anything that matches public code, you can block it. You can also click to allow GitHub to use my code snippets for product improvements, which means going back into the model. So you can change those two things. But what I say to that too is, because I've tried using it, I'm like, similar code, what does that mean, right? So if I'm doing fizzbuzz in Python, is this groundbreaking types of code? Is this what GitHub Copilot suggests to me? Is this going to be similar to something that's probably already committed out there? Probably, right? Which means GitHub Copilot isn't going to help me with this. And I recently had, while I was working on a new website, and I said, hey, can you help me add a contact form? And I used the GitHub Copilot chat and it goes, yeah, you can use this contact form and here's the code. And then it just like blanked it out. And I was like, what? And then it goes, this code has been blocked because it matches publicly available code on the internet. I'm like, it's a contact form, right? How many people have contact forms out there? So think about the type of code that you're writing and thinking about, is this actually groundbreaking? Do I want GitHub Copilot to suggest to me code for whatever reason, right? So have a think about that, right? The other thing with GitHub Copilot is we can code the way we want, right? Now, I mentioned GitHub Copilot is available in your favorite IDE. Now, a lot of us like to work in our IDEs, but not everyone does. Some people like to work in the terminal. So now we have GitHub Copilot in the terminal. And this was from a demo a little while ago. So the way it works is a little bit different, but the interface is still the same, right? So this is using GitHub Copilot on the terminal. I can say, hey, how do I merge a pull request? And it goes, yep, here's the function to do that. Would you like me to implement that function now? Right? So we can use GitHub Copilot on the command line to ask specifically about GitHub commands. How do I merge a pull or commands? How do I merge a pull request? How do I clone a repository? What are the kind of extensions? GitHub Copilot or GitHub CLI is open source. So the GitHub CLI is open source, which means anyone in the room here could build an extension for that. So I asked GitHub Copilot, where do I find all the extensions? Right? I can also use just generic Git commands, like how do I make a commit? And GitHub Copilot will tell me how to do that and give me a little explanation of it as well, right? So we'll say, would you like to run this query, revise it? How do I sync to system ups or sync to upstream? How do I do these things, right? And my favorite one, because I always forget all the commands, is even just using basic or generic shell commands, right? Now, again, this is Windows, so don't hate on me for using Windows. But how do I install NPM? How do I use Bash? How do I run as admin, right? How do I do these things? So we can use GitHub Copilot from the command line like this too, which I think is really cool. So who in the room hadn't used GitHub Copilot yet? A few of you? You can try it for free for 60 days, zero obligation. So when people say to me, oh, I'm just not quite sure, I'm like, just give it a go. Try it out and see try it if you're working for someone else and they've said don't use generative AI. Try it on your personal stuff. Don't go and use your work stuff to try GitHub Copilot if they've said not to use it. So put it on a personal project you might have. Maybe you've been doing some stuff for Hacktoberfest. You might want to do that. So use it for that. So these are some of the exciting things that are coming next in the last 6 minutes that I've got. Now, granted, these few things I'm showing you because they're really, really cool, but these few things are only available for GitHub Copilot for Enterprise. So we've got 3 additions for GitHub Copilot. The first one is individuals. This means everyone just uses it for your own individual purpose. GitHub Copilot for Business, which means your suggestions won't be used anywhere. If you've got a business license, you can manage all your team members, so they can't actually change the GitHub Copilot settings. And GitHub Copilot for Enterprise. So GitHub Copilot for Enterprise is currently in beta. So if you are working for a company that has GitHub Copilot for Business and they want to use this, they can try it out. But I'm showing you this not as a sales pitch, because that's not what I'm here to do, but because it's really cool, right? And I wanted to show you some of the capabilities of AI as we're currently seeing it and the types of technology that's actually becoming available to people. So this is now GitHub Copilot on the .com experience. So I've got a GitHub Copilot icon at the top. I can go in here and I can ask any specific question I want, or even any generic question. How do I shorten a URL? And GitHub Copilot will think for a second, and then it will go, cool, you can shorten by using a service, and here are a bunch of them there. And I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. I could even say, where can I go to learn Python? Again, fairly generic question. And it says there are many online resources. You can go to Coursera, you get a free code camp, you can do these things, okay? That's relatively basic stuff. We'll probably do that with ChatGPT, maybe, right? But we can do it here as well. But the other thing that I think is way more cool with GitHub Copilot Chat is actually being able to chat with my own code. So say, for example, I've got Tooljet here, which is an open source project. I downloaded it and forked it for Hacktoberfest. I have no idea what it does. So I can index this, and once it's been indexed, I can ask GitHub Copilot to tell me all about the repository. I can say, what does it actually do? What does Tooljet do? It goes, yada, yada, yada. Tooljet is an open source framework that does all these things. It even gives me the references to where it found the information. Then I go, hey, this sounds like a cool project. I might want to contribute to it. And then I can even ask GitHub Copilot. I say how, but I even figured out that I wrote a typo, basically asking what are the contribution guidelines before I go and commit to this open source project. And it can respond with what those are and give me the references to where it's found that information. Now, I think that's really, really cool. Another one we can do is, who in this room has had to review a pull request and there is like no information about the pull request at all? Lots of people, right? So this is a pull request that I made. Add location. It's a little bit more specific than some people put in. But in my conversation, I literally just wrote some changes. Now, if I was a reviewer, I had to go in the files and have a look at what that actually means. I can now use GitHub Copilot summaries. Give me a full summary of the pull request. What it does, what it focuses on, it's saying this is mainly focusing on the enhancement of this class, and this file. It's also added in a couple more options for the lost pet. This is a lost pet thing, which is another thing. And if I update that, it's even given me the links to those changes that have been made, right? This is really cool because I work with a lot of people who don't always put their, proper things in pull requests. So this should hopefully get rid of that. Another one you can do with GitHub Copilot for Enterprise is actually train and fine-tune your own model using GitHub Copilot, which I think is another really, really cool thing. So this one here, we've got training a custom model. We've chosen 5 repositories here, and the status is, this does take a little bit of time because, it takes time to train language models, but we've chosen these 5 repositories to put into our model and fine-tune it, and then we can ask GitHub Copilot some more specific things about this. So as I promised, the link to all the resources that I've talked about today. So these are things like if you'd like to create your own fancy Octocat, there's a link there to some of the wait lists. So if you are, say, a PyCharm user and you really want GitHub Copilot Chat in PyCharm, you can sign up to the JetBrains GitHub Copilot Chat waitlist. There's a link to the research study, so I'm not just spouting out numbers to you from our research study. So all that bit about developer productivity and things like that, that's all in there. Some links to the prompt engineering. That prompt engineering stuff isn't just specific for GitHub Copilot. If you're using any other kind of generative AI, that prompt engineering, those tips that I gave you, that's really useful for so many things, right? A few other cool resources in there as well. Now, we don't have time for questions, deliberately. If you'd like to ask questions, I know a lot of you will run off to the keynote afterwards. Feel free to come and have a chat with me. If you would like to grab some stickers, there's some GitHub stickers up the front here. But if you'd like to ask me a question, either you're watching the recording and you're like, hey, I want to ask a question, you can do so on any of the social media platforms I mentioned. So tomorrow or the next day you go, hey, there's that really a question I want to ask, you can do so. So thank you so much for having me. Hope you enjoyed NDC London. We'll see you next time.